Do Black Americans really know where they come from? Yes. You? Do you honestly know? Not the story they fed us in school, or the neat version written in government archives, but the real origin of your bloodline. Were your ancestors already here? The original black tribes of this land? Or were they taken from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade? Because here's the truth. Most Black Americans walk around carrying confusion that was manufactured. The system didn't just lose the records, it buried them. Censuses rewritten, tribal roles erased, entire histories silenced so you'd never be sure where you belong. Ask your parents, your grandparents. One might say we were native. Another might swear we came from Africa. So who's right? Who are the real Black Americans? To find out, we have to peel back the layers, to look past DNA charts and classroom lies, to the roots of two worlds that collided and became one. Because somewhere between what was stolen and what survived lies the truth of who we are. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. To understand the puzzle, we start with the people who call themselves Black Native Americans, individuals whose bloodlines trace back to tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole. Long before slavery was institutionalized, many of these Black natives lived as free people, defending land, protecting their nations, and shaping their own sovereignty. Their story is not one of servitude, but of resistance, alliance, and survival. The Seminole are one of the clearest examples, a tribe that welcomed runaway Africans, allowing them to live freely, intermarry, and even govern alongside them. These Black Seminoles were not outsiders. They were warriors, diplomats, and protectors of their territory. Their culture became a fusion of African tradition and indigenous ritual, shared ceremonies, shared foods, shared struggle, shared spirit. Yet here's where the question deepens. Even these native Black tribes are believed by some to have originally come from Africa in ancient times, migrating long before Europe ever set foot on American soil. But for the sake of clarity, when colonization arrived, there were two distinct groups: those Black people who were already here as tribal nations, and those who would be forced here through chains. And that second story, the story of the stolen Africans, is where the next chapter begins. The second group became known as African Americans, the descendants of millions of Africans who were kidnapped, sold, and shipped across the Atlantic in one of the darkest crimes in human history. Their identity was forged through chains, blood, and survival. Unlike the Black native tribes who held land, language, and lineage, these Africans were stripped of everything: their names, their nations, their religions, their families, even their memory of home. Slave masters erased the past on purpose, so the enslaved could never trace themselves back to greatness. Out of that trauma was born a new identity, one forced to rebuild itself from broken pieces on foreign soil. And yet from that pain came a fire, a people who would fight for literacy, fight for freedom, fight for civil rights, fight to be seen as human in a land that profited from their suffering. This struggle is what fundamentally distinguishes African Americans from Black Native Americans, not in worth, but in experience. One lineage fought as original inhabitants defending their soil, while the other fought as stolen souls resisting a system built to crush them. And in both battles, Blackness refused to die. But before we compare cultures, there's something else we must understand. Because after slavery, the story of Black identity in America became even more tangled and even more misunderstood. As time passed, these two Black worlds, the native tribes and the African American descendants of slavery, began to form identities that were similar in skin, but different in story. Black Native Americans held fast to the customs, rituals, and languages of their tribal nations, preserving ceremonies tied to the land and to their ancestors. Their culture flowed through songs, dances, spiritual traditions, and governance systems that existed in North America long before colonization. Meanwhile, African Americans were forced to reconstruct a culture from ashes, blending fragments of African memory with the reality of American oppression. Out of that fusion came new creations, soul food from scraps, spirituals sung in fields, jazz and blues born from pain and genius. Their identity became one of resilience, shaped by survival and political struggle, from slavery to Jim Crow to the civil rights movement. Yet despite these differences, both groups carried the weight of displacement. Black natives were pushed to the margins of their own homelands and stripped of tribal rights, while African Americans were chained, segregated, and dehumanized by law. Two paths, two histories, both scarred by the same system and the same nation, and through that suffering, their cultural lines would eventually collide again, rewriting what it meant to be black in America. The story doesn't stop there, because the line between these two identities only grows more complex as the generations go on. Despite their different beginnings, both black Native Americans and African Americans were crushed under the same weight of racism, exclusion, and systemic control. One group was denied tribal rights because of their African blood, while the other was denied humanity because of their black skin. Both were pushed to the bottom of the social order, forced into second-class status in the land they either belonged to or were dragged to. Then came the Great Migration, a movement that changed everything. From the early 1900s to the 1970s, millions of African Americans fled the Jim Crow South, heading north and west in search of dignity, work, and freedom. In these new cities and new neighborhoods, black worlds began to mix. Black natives, black migrants, and descendants of the enslaved lived side by side, married into each other's families, shared stories, shared music, and shared struggle. But because records were missing, stolen, or destroyed, many families lost the ability to prove their tribal roots. Oral history became the only history. Over time, traditions blended, identities overlapped, and the system, which had erased the breadcrumbs on purpose, used that confusion to its advantage. By the time the 20th century ended, countless black Americans didn't know if they were Native, African, or both. And that uncertainty wasn't an accident. It was the result of centuries of erasure, paperwork manipulation, and cultural disruption, designed to break our connection to who we were. When the questions became too heavy, and the records too broken, many black Americans turned to DNA testing, hoping science could do what history refused to do: give us clarity. Companies like Ancestry and 23andMe promised answers, and yes, some people discovered Native markers, African markers, or a mix of both. But even this science has limits, because DNA cannot always detect a tribe, a nation, or a story. A person can have a Native great-grandparent and still show no Native genes, because chromosomes are passed down randomly. And on top of that, the genetic database for Native black tribes is painfully small, meaning many results get misclassified as African by default. So once again, black people are told to accept an identity that might not be the full truth. DNA gave us clues, not closure. It confirmed what we already knew, that our bloodlines are older, wider, and deeper than the boxes America tries to stuff us into. But it still could not answer the question that has haunted us for centuries. Who is the real black American? So after all the erasure, all the mixing, all the stolen records, and broken bloodlines, who can stand up and claim the title, real black American? The truth is this: there is no single mold, no one path origin, no pure storyline for black identity in America. Some of us descend from the original black tribes who lived on this land before a flag ever existed. Others descend from the stolen sons and daughters of Africa, who were forced into a nightmare and still found a way to sing, to build, to fight, and to rise. And many carry both stories in their veins. The system tried to pit those histories against each other, but the truth is they sit on the same fractured foundation, a legacy of resistance, survival, and unbreakable spirit. Being a real black American isn't about choosing Africa or America, Native roots or slave roots. It's about understanding that our story is layered, complex, and deliberately hidden, because the full truth would make us whole again. Real Black identity is not singular. It is a spectrum of greatness that refuses to die, no matter how many times they try to erase it. So what does it all mean? It means Black identity in America is not a straight line. It's a web of roots stretching across oceans, nations, and centuries. It means you are more than a label, more than a census box, more than the limited story they tried to assign you. Whether your ancestors were the original Black tribes of this land, the stolen children of West Africa, or a blend of both, your identity is real, valid, and worthy of honor. You are the descendant of survivors, people who fought, endured, created, protected, prayed, rebelled, and rebuilt themselves in a world designed to break them. That is what makes a real Black American, not paperwork, not a percentage, not a database, but the unbroken spirit that lives in our story. So the question now is not just where do we come from? The question is, where do we go from here, now that we know our past is bigger than the lies? The journey of identity is still unfolding, and the power to claim it is in our hands. Because once you know who you are, no system, no government, and no history book can ever tell you what you're not.